Welcome, everyone, to the WhyHunger Podcast. I'm your host, Colin, and at WhyHunger, we believe that hunger is solvable and nutritious food is a human right. That's why we work with grassroots organizations and social movements across the globe who are working to end hunger and build a better world. I'm excited to have today's guest on the show, representing from the Food Chain Workers Alliance. We have with us Sonia, Singh and Fabiola, Valdez. Thank you for joining us today, ladies. And I wanted to just get started and share with our audience just a little bit about what you do with Food Chain Workers Alliance, a little bit about what you individually do, as well as just overall what the organization does in support of workers across the globe.
Just to share the sort of brief overview of the Food Chain Workers Alliance, and first just to start out saying that we're so thrilled to finally be doing this podcast with you, Colin, and appreciate WhyHunger's support of our work over many, many years. So it's really great to be able to have this conversation this morning. The Food Chain Workers Alliance is a coalition of organizations, of food worker organizations across the food chains. We have members across the US and also some members in Canada. And all of our members are in some way working to organize food workers to improve wages and working conditions, from restaurant worker organizing to farm worker organizing and all the different steps in between along the food chain. So we have 34 member organizations, and our work is to sort of help connect up that organizing to look for ways that we can find leverage and find power by looking at our food system as a food chain and all of the ways that workers are connected, and to basically support food workers to organize, from leadership training to campaign support to communication support to things like the report that I know we're going to talk about, where we try to bring together all of the analysis and amazing work that our members are doing. So yeah, I've personally been with the Food Chain Workers Alliance for now, I go by the age of my daughter, about 3 years. I started when she was 2 months old. And yeah, it's been amazing to have this chance to work with all of our members and support so much incredible work on the ground. Pass it over to Fabiola.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. And same, thank you so much, Colin, for having us. Yeah, just like Sonia said, our work with our members is a lot of it focuses on supporting them on their local fights and their local campaigns, but also to look for opportunities for collaboration between members. And this can look like, our members that work only with restaurant workers, right? How do we create spaces so they can talk to each other? Because some are in Florida, some are in Massachusetts and New York, but also, like Sonia said, just across industry. For example, something that we're working out with our farm worker sector groups. Well, they are located, Washington State, New York, Vermont, Florida, California, New Jersey. It's that we are working together to push against the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which is a piece of legislation that is going to make its way into the Senate at some point this summer. But that, all of our members know that they will create very, dangerous conditions and precedents for farm workers across the country. So we're sort of, we support them in creating this space where all of these organizations that work with farm workers and are led for farm workers come together so we can figure out, a strategy to push against legislations like this. Just an example of something that we're doing concretely.
And of course, as you alluded to earlier, Sonia, we definitely want to get into the meat of really talking about your recent report. You recently released a report back in February. In regards to the treatment of food chain workers. We are not disposable, and really talking about that, and not only the realities that food chain workers, as you expressed, that have just long existed, but really, I think a lot of us have been looking at how the pandemic has impacted us in such a great way, especially our food system, but really how it exacerbated the issues that food chain workers and food workers have faced. So could you please just expound on that report and just share what your findings have been, and kind of just, frame the landscape of what is really taking place within the food system in that regard?
The report was something that we decided to release because we were seeing a lot of trends across our membership. From the very beginning of the pandemic, we of course could see and our members immediately identified that food workers were not going to have the option to stay home. They, across the board, have been deemed essential workers and required to go into work. And where they were not, where there were shutdowns, for example, in the restaurant sector, there were other kinds of impacts of people just not being able to access income support and be able to count on any kind of support to be able to look after their families. So there was the sort of two layers, both being required to go into work and not knowing if those environments were going to be safe, and then being out of work and not having any access to support. And already we know that the food workers earn the lowest median wages of any sector. So already people were struggling with really low wages. And so our members kicked into gear organizing around the sort of two frames from the very beginning. And the report was our effort to highlight and lift up that organizing, but also lift up what we heard our members saying, that COVID is a crisis. It is a huge public health crisis. It's a huge worker health and safety crisis, but it's just exacerbating the pre-existing conditions that already have existed in the food system for food workers. So just an example, that we have a number of members that work with food processing workers, and they for years have been talking about how line speeds are so dangerous for workers. They cause people to be working in very fast conditions with a lot of repetitive motion, and that has caused many types of injuries. It's something that our members have been organizing around, and being able to take just something basic as a bathroom break. And in the middle of a COVID crisis, that pre-existing unsafe workplace just made the conditions for COVID to spread so much more, much more easily. And really, we saw the impact of the huge outbreaks that occurred from meat processing workers. And our members were saying, we've been telling you this all along. Our workers have been organizing around these issues all along. And we could look at any sector of the food chain and see that. Fabiola has done a lot of work with our farm worker members and done a lot of farm worker organizing. So same thing, that pre-existing conditions really impacted how farm workers faced the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Sonia. So I think it's also important to consider, like Sonia said, that these conditions were not created by the pandemic, right? Like we've been hearing from our members that this has been an issue, that the food workers across the food chain have been working under very dangerous and precarious conditions, but they're also excluded outside of the workplace from major relief and social programs, right? And many of them in this country have been and are being persecuted by law enforcement, whether it's local police are targeting them because they're people of color, or immigration enforcement, where farm workers, not specifically, but in very particular ways in upstate New York and in other states that are close to the border, are just working under constant fear. The border patrol or ICE is going to show up to the workplace, and they don't feel protected by the employer. Right. So so they're facing a pandemic under all of this already. And just talk a little bit about, what our farm worker groups are kind of in farm worker led organizations are sort of dealing with. For example, in New York and in Vermont, right, the dairy industry is very big. It's like a big economy push for the states. And that is an industry that is a 24/7 production process, which means that virtually there's always somebody working in a dairy farm. Always. Doesn't matter the weather, it doesn't matter the snowstorms. Wow. There's always somebody working there. On average, workers work between 12 and up to 18 hours a day. And many workers report that they don't have the time to take, to eat, to take a break, and which makes frequent hand washing virtually impossible under those conditions. Also, a large percent of these workers live in employer-provided housing and farm housing, which also our members report to be in deplorable conditions, right? And this is also from our members that are located in Florida as well, and in Washington State report similar things. So workers live in tiny, trailers and overcrowded trailers with no ventilation, And that has been what we found out, like very much like one of the main reasons that workers get COVID. We had a really horrible case here in upstate New York in May, so last year, with one of the, it was a massive outbreak in one of the largest farms in the state. I think it's called Green Empire in Oneida. And the company had 250 migrant workers and 171 tested positive.
Wow.
So, and a lot of it had to do with the housing, right? So then, because of, again, these working conditions and this just kind of structural barriers that farm workers and other food workers are facing, they're just so prone to have these kinds of outbreaks. But like Sonia said, workers have been, surviving this campaign and organizing under this pandemic, and organizing under this pandemic. We've had really important victories, before the pandemic and after. And in New York, for example, our members have already been part of, wanting the protect their right to organize for farm workers, driver licenses for everybody, regardless of immigration status. And more recently, they were part of a victory from the New York HERO Act, which is a legislation that just was signed by Cuomo that will provide standards for health and safety and for protections for workers and the workplace from not only COVID, but from all infectious diseases. And a really interesting, part of the legislation is that it gives the tools to the workers to advocate for themselves and to monitor if the employer is, it's respecting the law, and it really gives them the power to organize however they see fit to improve their working and living conditions. So that is a victory that we're just celebrating, that we're just coming out of that last week.
Yes, I did see that. It was an awesome victory. So that was an amazing fight. And it really, like, of course, as we've seen as well, and obviously as you've seen, just like the pandemic did provide a great opportunity for people to kind of just see and shed light on these particular issues. So, one would hope that, in that people can pay more attention and be more aware and see how they can get involved. Would love to know, one, just like, as you see now with, especially coming off this recent victory in this, going forward, what's next as you continue your work or the next projects or campaign? You mentioned one in particular, but if you can just share a little bit about what's coming forward for the future, and also how folks can get involved and support in any possible way.
Thanks, Colin. I think that that is absolutely something that we've seen. The visibility of food workers and of all essential workers has really grown during this time, and I think also the clear impact that Black workers, Latinx workers, Indigenous workers, and workers of color generally have borne such a disproportionate impact, and that this is something we can't ignore. That who is it that's doing these essential jobs that before perhaps folks never really considered, and so that's our hope, that the unacceptable nature of who has become infected, of who has suffered the most death, the most retaliation, that these are things that are shaping our lens going forward. And we do see that there is an increased, I think, willingness to support and join in supporting food workers. So that is really positive and exciting. And I think for us right now, we still are, we're celebrating the win in New York State for enforceable health and safety standards, but we're still not seeing at the federal level the promised action of a federal health and safety emergency temporary standard that would protect essential workers. And that failure of the regulatory body called OSHA to act over this last year has literally been the cause of many of these workplace illnesses and deaths. If we had a strong standard at the federal level, employers would have been forced to put in measures that would have saved lives. And so that will continue to be our focus until we see that strong standard and see that it's protecting as many essential workers as possible. We're hopeful that it's coming. It was promised by the Biden administration but it's over a month late. So we still are calling for that, and I've been encouraging our supporters to join us in calling on the White House to ensure that a strong emergency temporary standard is put in place, because we know the pandemic is not over. There are still many ways that workers need protections on the job. So that's a really important fight. I think then beyond that, we've seen, as Fabiola mentioned, that the pandemic sparked organizing, it accelerated organizing. And so our lens and focus at the Food Chain Workers Alliance is how do we continue to scale that up, to continue to enable food workers to organize. So we're looking at things like the PRO Act that would take away barriers to not just food workers, but to all workers. That right now, it's just, we saw in the Alabama warehouse organizing earlier this year, just the huge odds that workers are up against when they want to try to organize their workplace and have a little bit more of that power that can help them, for example, tell an employer, I'm not comfortable with going into this work environment. It's not safe, or we need higher wages, or we need this, we need to end this kind of discriminatory treatment. So that continues to be our focus in terms of looking at what are all the ways through legislation, but also supporting individual campaigns and fights. Maybe Fabiola, do you want to share just about how to support those fights on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you. Again, I think we mentioned at the beginning how our members are trying to, are pushing against the Farm Worker Modernization Act, right? Which is basically legislation that was introduced and is presented as this, triumphant immigration reform. However, we and our members see that this is going to set, very dangerous precedents, because there's very problematic things on that bill, and particularly the path for legalization of farm workers is too long, is too complicated, it's too difficult, and farm workers cannot wait that long, and especially after the year that we've had, and especially after, finally recognizing them as, as essential, and people calling them heroes and all that stuff. They need to have, path to legalization now. They cannot wait. So some ways that folks can support our members in their fight too is, they can go to our website, they can sign our petition, they can contact their local representatives in the Senate particularly, and tell them to oppose this bill. Another thing is, you can also go to our website and you can see all of our members that we are, lucky enough to work with, and look at all the amazing things that they're doing. Everything from fighting for driver licenses in Massachusetts, forming unions in New York City with laundry workers, farm workers fighting in Washington State also to pay, to earn overtime. Farm workers in Florida trying to access, vaccines, warehouse workers, retail workers, production line workers, like all of these organizations are doing fantastic work. They're always in need of more support, and whether it is, as volunteer or, again, signing petitions, supporting campaigns, donating your time. So we really encourage folks to just go and look, and see who our members are. Our members, of course, in Canada too, and just find a way that you can support them. There's always going to be opportunities.
And an easy way is on our website. You can just sign up for our email list, which we send sort of every couple of months, a summary of what have been some of the most important highlights from that member organizing. And so that's a really easy way to kind of get, not very regularly, but updates when there's a real need to act, and also kind of what it is that our members are organizing and winning, and how they can use support.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for sharing just and bringing this insight to the table. That very much so more and more people need to hear and understand and be aware of, and really take the opportunity to take charge and transform this whole situation. So I thank you both for joining me on the show today. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you so much, Fabiola, for imparting your knowledge, and we look forward to more of what you're doing, and we look forward to standing in solidarity and moving with you. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you to WhyHunger for all the amazing support over the years. We're glad to be in solidarity with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to thank you all for joining me as well for another episode of the WhyHunger Podcast. Be sure to make sure you follow us on social media, and for more information on the work that we do, visit www.whyhunger.org, and make sure you hit subscribe, hit like, and hit the notification icon to make sure you're aware of the next time that we post on our YouTube channel at WhyHunger. So thank you all. Take care. I'll see you next time.